My name is David Krussow. I work as a battalion chief here at the Grass Valley Air Attack Base up in Nevada County. The day of the Frenchtown Fire, I was the air attack officer on that. So, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But basically, I roll as the air attack officer is to kind of be the coordinator in the sky. The Air Forces, all that we do up in the air is supporting the guys on the ground. It's the bulldozers, the firefighters with the hoses that actually put the fire out. What we do is try and suppress that fire enough that they are able to get in there and do direct work along the edges of the fire. As I heard referenced a little bit earlier, I think the Oregon Peak was one of the first reporting parties for this fire. I was right here off of Frenchtown Dobbins Road near Camper Lane. And it started right off the road. You'll see down here in the corner of the picture. Oops. This is kind of the area where the fire started. You'll see that kind of swale in the road there. There's a little ravine that kind of runs up there. And you'll see from the first picture that our first number one priorities were all these houses up here on the other side of Camper Lane. So this is a picture just as I was coming over scene of the incident. You can see the fire had started down here just up from the road. It had already spotted across this dirt road, which is about an 8 or 10 foot wide dirt road. And it was making a hard run up in the brush up through here. And you can see that that's all fire down in the ravine. Now, keep in mind that as an air attack, we're flying 2,500 feet over top of the incident to give all the air tankers and helicopters and other aircraft room to operate below us. So our visibility of the scene, the fire sometimes isn't as great as everyone assumes it to be, because we're close to half a mile above the ground that we're looking at. But you can see the fire has already gone across there. And as Chief Bars referenced earlier, one of our big problems this year is fuels and fires spotting in the fuels. And you can see over here, right by the house, already it's spotted in that area. So our first, I had just one tanker because the other one that's normally assigned to us was already on another fire. I believe they were on the Dixie fire that day. So I had one drop to try and to work with and trying to pick out what the priorities were. And of course, that house was our first priority. This is a picture taken shortly after our first drop. And you can see the bright pink retardant. And my plan was to tie into this road here as an anchor, kind of like Rob was talking about, something to work off of, and use that as kind of a fire line. And then we dropped all the way across the top of the head as far as we could get that retardant to reach. And that retardant came up to about here. Are you guys able to see the highlights on my screen? Is that working? It's a new tool for me, so hopefully it works out well.
Working well.
Excellent. So in the on coming back down to the road, and again, you can see that dirt road that makes that angle right there. That was our other anchor point. And so we put our bulldozers in down there to start making line up here. It was very hot for them in there. And a huge potential for spot fires all up in this area here. You can see where the wind is pushing the smoke. In that smoke is a bunch of embers, and those embers are what causes the spot fires. And it doesn't matter how wide your line is, if a spot fire gets pushed to the area outside of it and that spot fire takes in the fuel, that fire is going to jump your fire line and you have a new issue. This is what's been challenging us all summer with how dry the fuels are. But you can see this retardant line came in here, did its job. It actually held that fire in check right there. And these homeowners right here, this one in particular has quite a bit of clearance around their house. The first in fire engines came in there and they were able to easily defend that house. And you'll see that in the pictures. We didn't lose any houses on this fire, which is pretty remarkable. And I consider that a success, but due a large in part to the clearing that these people had done around their houses. You can see even from this picture, if it had been heavy fuels like on this right flank here, we would not have been able to save those houses. You can see how big those flames are. This was within 10 minutes of the fire starting, and already we have flames that are 20-foot flame lengths burning through that brush right there. So the fire started late in the afternoon. We got the dispatch at 4:32 p.m. The air attack, so I showed my roll time. We were rolling out of our station, so to speak, at the airport at 4:38, so 6 minutes later, and took off. As soon as we got up, we could see the column of smoke and ordered an additional 2 tankers. So within 10 minutes, we had 4 tankers responding to this fire, and some of them come from a bit of a distance away. On our initial dispatch, so from the time that smoke report got called in and we started dispatching, we will dispatch during the summer. a minimum of 6 fire engines, 2 water tenders, 2 bulldozers, 2 hand crews, a battalion chief, and then kind of a host of well, I generally refer to overhead personnel. So safety officers, training officers, people that can come up and they each have their own truck and they can basically take command and control of a different portion of that fire. So we had a full dispatch to this fire, and by the time I got on scene, the first fire engines were already on scene and pulling in, and they were trying to figure out how to get up because the original address put them down here a little ways off. So it took them a little bit to talk them into exactly where that fire is, which is again is a common challenge for us. This is taken at the end of the fire, looking back, but you can see here's that swale in the road again. The first retardant drop I put in went all the way across here and stopped about right there and came back, and you can see that held that initial fire in check. So the retardant did its job right there. This house was protected, but as soon as I had that retardant light in, the fire spotted across my line right up here, right here, and right here. So within a few minutes of that retardant drop being in there, I had 3 new spots that were pushing in on this house up here. And again, you can see that the clearance around that house is what protected them and what saved that house ultimately. We did get a fire engine up there, but I can assure you, if that house looked like this brush over here, there's not a chance in the world we would have saved it. So at that point, this fire is it's growing faster than what resources we have. So the battalion chief on the ground ordered, he significantly augmented his ground resources, and I significantly augmented my air resources. So our first plan was trying to box it in here and keep it about 2 acres, which is over 90% of the time we're able to do with quick action. But this one was moving too fast. So at this point, for tactics, we'll fall back and just grab an anchor point, and my focus on the air was to block in this whole right side of the fire, to try and hold that in check and buy some time for the ground resources to get in here and get bulldozers. And you can see all these bulldozer lines were put in after the retardant line, but the fire activity was suppressed enough that those dozers were able to get in there. So at this point, I ordered 2 more large air tankers, what we call type 1 air tankers, and we ordered a couple additional helicopters. One of the things that we're really excited about this year is we have a contract for a helicopter now stationed at Auburn, which is something we haven't had before. And this was one of the first fires that they were effective on. And so they were here very quickly, much more quickly than what we are accustomed to. And we immediately put them to work again on structure protection and supporting the crews on this left flank here. So just a little quick, these are our CAL FIRE air tankers, probably a familiar sight to you guys. We call them a type 3. They're one of the smaller air tankers, but they're very, very agile, and they're very adept at working in canyons and putting in line in very challenging, tight spots. They fly with 1 pilot. Some of the best pilots in the world. It's far more challenging to fly a tanker than most people realize. It's truly one of the more difficult things a pilot can do. These ones hold up to 1,200 gallons of retardant, and we can refill them out of Chico. We can refill them out of here at Grass Valley, or we can refill them out of McClellan, are our 3 closest bases. For this fire, obviously Grass Valley was our closest base, and we were averaging 11 to 14 minutes turnaround time from the time they would drop on the fire to come back here, land, pull into the pits, reload, pull back out, take off, and get back to the fire and drop again was about 17 minutes, which is pretty remarkable. These are larger tankers. These are we call it type 1. It can hold up to 3,000 gallons. It's much larger, but it's not able to get into the small canyons. So we ordered a couple of these. We had one that came out of Reading and one that came, I think both of them came from Reading on this day. So, and then these are our new helicopters. This is a Black Hawk. It holds 1,000 gallons of water, which is 3 times more water than our older helicopters held. And it's you'll see right here, the tank is fixed to the bottom of the aircraft. So they can immediately, as soon as they're on scene, they can drop the snorkel, start sucking water into the tanks and start going to work. They don't have to take time to attach a bucket or any of that kind of stuff. So that's been valuable. And the fact that they can drop so much more water has been a big deal for us. This is the plane that I'll be flying in. The pilot's a two-person airplane. The pilot sits up front. I sit right behind him, and I coordinate the airspace. We are air traffic control for that whole fire incident. Anything that happens in the air is our responsibility. And again, our job is to support the guys on the ground and allow them to get in there and get the bulldozer lines in, hand lines in, and get the hose with the water to actually put the fire out. So we buy time for the guys on the ground to get in, and then we help coordinate getting in. So this is towards the end of the fire. I didn't have a lot of time to take pictures, but the fire started back down here on the left of your screen. You can just barely see that swale in the road there that we're using for reference. And then these are those original houses. So that first retardant drop did hold that fire in there. It spotted across and started going on up that left side. And then for the tankers, we were focusing on this right-hand side. And you can see at this point, the bulldozers, they were still working back down in here. They haven't put that line all the way up through here. But you can see we're dropping just outside of that fire to give it fire a little bit of time until it hits that retardant. We want it to be hitting that retardant at the same time the bulldozers are coming up through there, or the hand crews or fire engines, whatever ground resources. So we got to try and time it a little bit with what's happening on the ground to be the most effective. And then up here, you can see the smoke column. All those embers are getting carried up, and they'll drop down here and start new spot fires, which is what was happening here. So this fire ended up spotting several times, all up in this area and up in this whole little basin up here, which was a continual challenge for us. The fire front moved all the way up through here, and the fire engines, and then the helicopter that I showed you, he landed right here, dropped his hand crews off right here. And so those guys were literally just out there by themselves with tools, shovels, and Pulaskis and things of that nature, trying to protect this structure and then some structures down in this area. And then the helicopter would come in and drop water on them, go back out, pick up water, and come back. By that point, the smoke and fire was blowing right over top of these guys. I wasn't even able to see them on the ground. It was a very aggressive attack by the fire engines and the helitack crew on the ground there to try and protect all these structures. But again, you can see there was clearing around those houses, and that's ultimately had a huge play in them surviving the fire. So this is at the end of the fire. Now we're looking the other way. So we're looking from the top of the fire back down to the bottom. The fire started back down in here. Here's those original structures there and there. And then this would be, there's that swale in the road. And this would be what we call the right flank. If you're at the bottom of the fire looking towards the head, this is the right side. So you can see those dozers came all the way up right through our retardant. The retardant worked perfect and held that fire in check, with this one exception right here. You can see that our original retardant came in and around this way. The fire burned through that and started burning again. So we had to come in with a second round of retardant up that way. Here's that house at the top that the fire engines and the helitack crew protected. And they're making access off this left side and coming in here. And then all up here, you can see where all these different areas were burning that were spot fires. At this point, it was very late in the day. It was getting dark out. So literally these tanker drops were made across this head. They're looking directly into the setting sun. The sun will be off to the right of your screen. It was very challenging to see through the smoke and try and get those drops in there. But we just put in 2 rows of drops to try and catch any spot fires that we're burning through there through the night and protect this house up here. And it ended up working. It held that fire in check enough for the bulldozers to get in there and the hand crews to cut line around that fire. One last view, looking again, the fire started on your left of your screen, burned up the hill towards the right. And then here's those different check marks that we had across that bowl, that basin coming to the top. Final fire acreage, I think, was somewhere between 40 or 50 acres. And we were fortunate that we didn't get any spots out in this area. If this fire had happened 2 hours earlier in the afternoon, I don't think there's any way we would have held it on this ridge here. It would have gone considerably larger. With that, it's kind of a basic report on the fire. I'll open it up to any questions or anything that I might have missed, or anything that you might have questions on that I might be able to answer.
Yeah, this is Teresa. Do you hear me okay?
Yes.
That swell on the road where it started, just for your information, since you're in the sky, that is our irrigation ditch. Unfortunately, it's dry this year because we do have irrigation that comes through the Oregon House Dobbins area. And so a lot of those roads that you're seeing, if you kind of get a map when you have a moment, and start some of those roads you will not be able to get an engine on because it's the bank of the irrigation ditch. So it's not sometimes as wide as you think it is.
Right.
So that's just information for you.
Yeah.
Some local information.
Yeah. Nope. That makes sense. And like I said, it's interesting for me. I was on the day of the river fire as well, and I went back down to that one the other night to look at where it started. And it's amazing how different things look from the ground than they do from the air. But trying to chase out access roads and potential areas that we can use as fire lines is a big part of our job. But it's something that we're accustomed to, is things not working out the way we think. And a lot of times we end up having to create our own. But anytime we have
Exactly.
the opportunity, we're generally going to work off of something that pre-exists.
Yeah, well, maybe next year there'll be water in the ditch will help you
I
guys.
sure hope so. I hope there's water in a lot of
that's
places
just-
next year.
Right.
Hey,
but
David,
just-
this
I
is
just
Curtis.
kind of wanted to give you.
Yeah,
Okay,
Curtis,
thank
go
you,
ahead.
David.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
thank you.
just wanted to give you guys kudos. I've watched you for 20 years from the lookout tower up there at Oregon Peak. I've seen you guys lie a line down a fence, one side on the other, and not a drop on the other side of it. Great job what you guys do. Thank you very much.
I work with truly some of the best pilots in the world. I've spent a whole career doing different elements of aviation, from medical to rescue and now air attack. And I'll tell you that the pilots that we work with right now are phenomenal. And the challenges that they have of putting their huge, large aircraft, which were never intended to be so close to the ground, down in these tight canyons with thermals and air drafts and soft air is pretty unreal. And keeping the guys on the ground safe while they're doing it. They're literally dropping the retardant within 15 or 20 feet of guys on the ground sometimes, and getting that stuff right in there. It's pretty phenomenal to watch.
I flew P-3 Orion aircrew for 10 years in the military, and watching that
Well, you know.
DC-10 come up out of the canyon, I'm waiting for rivets to pop everywhere.
Yep, P3 is a great plane. So yeah, thank you.
For the people that listen to Air Attack when you're operating, could you just explain a little bit what the coverage levels are?
Absolutely. So our coverage level is a standard objective way of referencing how much retardant we want to put into a certain area. Our modern air tankers all have drop computers on them and fixed doors. So the door will open partially based on the calculated speed of the aircraft and what retardant level we set it for. So when we talk about a coverage level, we're talking about how many gallons of retardant we want on 100 square feet of ground. So if we ask for a coverage level 4, then that would be 4 gallons of retardant per 100 square feet. And we'll base that based on the fuel type, the spread of the fire, how rapidly the fire is. So if we're working a grass fire down in the valley, down in the flats, and it's early in the spring, and the fire is, it's going okay, but it's not going crazy, we might do a coverage level 2, and I can stretch that retardant tank over almost a quarter mile. But if we're in the heavy brush or timber, we're going to be doing a coverage level 6, or even on some of the big tankers, we can go coverage level 8 on some really, really thick, heavy canopy, because we're trying to get that retardant to break down through the trees. And one thing to keep in mind when you're talking to property owners and looking at doing shaded fuel breaks and things of that nature is, if you have your trees and your canopy is all closed, very little of that retardant that I drop will make it down through that canopy down to the ground. But if you have your trees open and trees are separated so that you can see the sky from the ground, or the ground from the sky, a tremendous my retardant is going to be much more effective, because it's going to go right down to the ground, and that's where we need it, is on the ground. We don't need it in the canopy of the trees. It really doesn't do any value up there. So when you're looking at clearing out property, to think about that, and to look up in the sky and say, how if a tanker came across here, how much retardant would get from that plane down to the ground. And if you can't see the sky, none of that retardant is going to make it down to the ground, and we'll keep hammering it in, but it's really not, it's going to be ineffective.
Can I use some of these pictures you've shared today on our website?
Absolutely. What I can do is maybe just email the pictures or the presentation to Allison, and then she can share it from there, if that works for you, Allison.
That would be great.
That'd be
Thanks so
great.
much,
Thank
David.
you.
Any other questions for David?
Yes, this is Ronnie. I
Oh,
was
hi,
wondering,
Ronnie.
how do you establish the evacuation perimeters? And because we got a little confused. We were not actually officially in the evacuation zone, but we got a false alert, and that was kind of interesting to notice.
So evacuations and defining who's going to be evacuated and who isn't is very complex and dynamic and challenging. So to determine what areas are going to be evacuated, first we need to establish where the fire is going, how quickly and rapidly it's moving, where we predict that it's going to go, and what a lot of people don't understand is predicting where it might go if anything changes. So on this Frenchtown fire, pretty much the winds were out of the southwest the entire time of the fire. They didn't shift on me at all. On the river fire that burned out of Colfax the other day, the wind shifted several times during the fire. So just to give an example, at one point, I don't know how well you guys know the Colfax area, but the fire was burning behind the high school. So up along the ridge, if you're driving up Interstate 80, driving eastbound towards Tahoe, and you look left above Colfax, it was burning up the ridge behind Colfax, going from the west towards the east, so just uphill. At one point, we were having tremendous fire behavior. We were probably getting 200-foot flame lengths through all the forest as the fire is moving up the ridge. And then I suddenly had a wind shift that shifted out of the northwest and started pushing that fire downhill directly towards the high school. So we had a long fire front that was burning up the ridge, and then the wind shifts and takes that whole fire front and pushes it down in towards Colfax. So when you're making an evacuation, if you're the chief who has to make that decision of what you're evacuating and what you're not, you have to take that into mind and consideration that right now the fire is moving towards the east, but all it takes is 2 minutes and the whole thing can shift and move directly down south. And that was where Colfax was, in the whole town of Colfax. So when we're figuring out and drawing our boxes for what's going to be evacuated, we're meeting directly with the sheriff, because the sheriff actually holds the ultimate responsibility for evacuations. We'll tell them where our recommendation is, but in breaking up the division of labor, evacuations actually fall upon the law enforcement, upon the sheriff for that given area. So the sheriff will be at the command post, will be in unified command in the Frenchtown fire. Starting from the very beginning of that fire, CAL FIRE was in unified command, which means we were the incident commander team was CAL FIRE and Yuba County SO. And so they sit together and looking at a map on the back of the truck, and they'll draw their box out of where they're going to evacuate. And keep in mind, it takes a while for the evacuations to happen. So we all saw what happened in Paradise a few years ago. The fire moved much more quickly than people were able to evacuate out in front of it. And that's always a big concern of ours. So particularly in the early stages of a fire, when things are very dynamic and moving very fast, we're just going to draw a box around an area. And most counties now have a software that will automatically do notifications of the evacuations, or they'll break it up in zones, or they'll just draw, depending on how their software works. And then, so you may be in a zone that for evacuation zone, and maybe this fire is just a little bit to the north of your zone, but it's encroaching in that zone. And we want these houses up here to be part of it. But the way that the zones have been broken out, it's going to evacuate that whole zone, which can be confusing to some people that say, well, the fire isn't really near us. But just to keep in mind that those fires can change, fires do and regularly change directions very quickly, and trying to give people enough of a time lead to safely get out of an area, not just for the people, but for the roads, because that's a big challenge is the roads plug up very quickly. So that's a message that I share quite frequently. I actually have some pretty interesting stories about it. But if you are ever in an evacuation warning, my recommendation, and this is something that my wife's gotten good at, we had to evacuate the other night with a river fire, is having a plan together ahead of time of what you're going to evacuate, what's most important to you. So we actually have a list that we pin and we with magnets on the refrigerator, with a list in priority order of what's most important to get out of that house. So if you only have 10 minutes, you're going to grab the first 3 things. If you have a day, then you can grab everything on the list and grab your boat or whatever. But having a plan so that you know what's going to evacuate out of that, and understanding that the evacuation process is a dynamic thing, and it's based on prediction, which comes with we're not always great at predicting. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was very great and helpful.